one of the most exciting finds involves Cave 7. And if I were speaking to a Jewish audience in Jerusalem, you'd hear big groans right now. There's no New Testament at Qumran, but there is. In Cave 7, of course this is not 300 years before Christ, this is from the 1st century. In Cave 7 we have different types of manuscripts. They're written on papyrus rather than the parchment, the sheepskin. And it is written in Greek, not the Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew. Cave 7 has collapsed. Its sides and roof have fallen away, and 19 small fragments of papyrus were found. And they couldn't read them initially, and then as they continued to study, oh yes, here is part of Exodus, and here is part of Jeremiah. And we can find that, and of course with computer analysis they can see how these letters would fit into a text. But they couldn't read the rest of them. 17 of the 19 fragments were unread. The reason was they had to find them in the Old Testament. And they weren't Old Testament. They were New Testament fragments. One of the most obvious is from Mark. And this particular fragment mentions Gennesaret, which is a peculiar word for the Sea of Galilee, used only in the 1st century. And so this helps date it together with the style of the letters. And this is a quotation from Mark 6:52 and 53 that mentions Gennesaret. Now, the way you do this is you superimpose text over this and you see if it fits. And so even with just a few letters, you can identify it. Well, you superimpose this text over it and you can see the top 2 words fit pretty well, but the rest of it doesn't work. Well, with computers you can adjust the margins, and of course you don't know how wide the margins were and how wide the columns were in which this was written, but when you adjust it, bingo. It fits up and down and sideways with the word Gennesaret, that unique first century word right in the middle. This is Mark 6:52 through 53. And as they continued to analyze it, they found several other passages from Mark and Acts and Romans and 1 Timothy and 2 Peter, which was one of the more controversial, and James, verified. And the real significance is this is necessarily before 68 AD, when the Romans came in and destroyed all of this. The style of the letters indicates about 50 AD. So that's probably when it was written, but it has to be before 68 AD. Now think about that. In Mark, style of the letters indicating about 50 AD now, we have verified. Jesus says, you see these great buildings, not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down. And what happened in 70 AD? The Romans marched in and the stones were thrown down, and here we see a 1st century street that's just pummeled by the stones that were tossed down. In 70 AD, and it was prophesied before 68 AD, and we can prove it. You see why they don't like that. And why they don't want to admit there's New Testament. Now, the same process that allowed them to identify Ezekiel and Jeremiah in the papyrus from the Greek, we use to find Mark, and they accept one and not the other because it doesn't fit their theological views. This is ongoing. We're finding more fragments, and you don't hear a lot about this either. They're papyrus fragments. Maybe New Testament. More of it will be found. Well, they are fighting that tooth and toenail. Hanan Eshel, who was a professor in one of the major universities there in Israel, in 2005 found a number of fragments from Leviticus, and the Bedouins actually found it. He, in his association with them, learned that they had them. They approached him. They wanted some money. He purchased them from the Bedouins and took them immediately to the Department of Antiquities, saying, here's what we have found. Well, they didn't like what he had found, and they fired him from his university position. They imprisoned him for over a year. You're not supposed to buy this stuff from the Bedouins. Well, how did you get all of the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, we got it from the Bedouins. that's not supposed to be done anymore. That'll encourage looting. And of course, we understand the problem, but they already had them. And what are you going to do? Just ignore them? He thought it made good sense to rescue them, to redeem them, as he put it, and they are afraid of what he's going to find. He is no longer a university professor. He's a tour guide. However, he is working with us in our digs and in our efforts to gain permits. He has identified the cave from which these fragments came, and we just finished the dig in December. At the end of the calendar year, you have to publish before you can apply for a new permit. That's being published probably this month, and then we'll immediately apply for the permit to go excavate this cave where they came from. Here we see Joseph Amara, the grandson of the original finder, at the front of this collapsed cave, and one of the reasons they wanted me there was to help identify geologically the fact this was certainly a collapsed cave, and it was. And he's got in his hand a piece of the parchment. Now, this one didn't have writing on it, or at least it wasn't obvious without infrared examination. But this is a collapsed cave. We want to get in there, and we would love to find some more New Testament fragments. It is the papyrus, the same kind that Cave 7 had. We'd appreciate your prayers there. That's a very exciting prospect.